So quite a while ago, as our team and I were running through the first truly big level within our game, testing to spot our endless army of bugs, we noticed that running through our world felt a little bit lifeless, and we slowly realized that through developing the core mechanics of our game, we had caused issues that was now our responsibility to solve. Of course, part of this lifelessness comes from the fact that we still need art and sound design and UI and all other manner of things that help the game feel complete. But fundamentally, it also felt like our protagonist, Silas, was a phantom, and not in a good way. He was running through buildings that felt like set dressing, playing out missions and static elements as if they gave no real resistance to an intruder of his quality, as if Silas had no chance to create opportunities for himself or even leave a mark of his passing because the world refused to put up a fight. Now, for reference, our goal is to make an indie action stealth game focused on investigating the whereabouts of a target, getting to them, and striking them down. And that stops being as fun if it feels like the world around you, the environment, is not putting up the same fight that perhaps the NPCs within them are. It's a problem that's very common when you focus mostly on creating gameplay mechanics that revolve around the player character. We've been chipping away at a parkour system, a stealth, and a combat system, all with the focus of giving Silas a way to traverse and interact with the humans in this world, beginning with himself. But it was clear that the next step was to give Silas more dynamic elements for the game to feel more alive. And because we're making the game in Unreal Engine, there were a lot of obvious ways we could go in terms of leaning into physics and different interactions that make something a little bit more interesting. The journey to accomplish this begins with the first of 3 stages. We're solving the problem of this world being too easy and uneventful to go through, so we must first add resistance. Resistance in this case is the addition of elements in the world that will force Silas to slow down, or have to find an alternate route in order to keep moving forward. There are some very simple elements that in my opinion should exist in any game like this. For example, in a lot of stealth games you have locked doors with keys that you're tasked to find. You can have elevators that sometimes work and sometimes don't, so you have to sneak in through the elevator shaft. You'll have windows to break, and in Dishonored you have things like the famous walls of light. All of these are believable, thematically relevant obstacles that put up a fight against the overpowered freak that your player character is usually going to be. It's what the world has as a defense against you outside of the normal guards. We wanted to add a little bit of our own resistance, and it all begun with something simple. What we do, and you can see it in our blockouts, is create very vertical, very oppressive buildings with a lot of verticality that you then have to find ways to scale, either through normal climbing, through pipe climbing that we added, through chain climbing, or finding parkour chains that'll let you gain height and gain an advantage. The idea was to add elements that pose a challenge to the player, but at the same time stemmed from the setting that you're in, and they have to both offer that resistance and offer the solution. When we add these mechanics, we need all these gameplay elements to work well together within this world in a believable way. So everything that's creating a challenge for Silas is the same thing that can give it an advantage, or at least have some sort of solution to it. Which leads us to the third part of this problem-solving journey, which is the exploitation. It's the taking advantage of those solutions, not only to overcome the resistance, but then create an advantage that you otherwise wouldn't have had. The world of New Aurelia was rushed, built with haste and ambition rather than sense, and every now and then there will be weak points in the architecture that Silas, if he has the means to do so, would exploit. One bullet can only kill one guard, but what if there's a group that gathers together under crates that hang above them? It'd be smarter to spend that bullet shooting out the rope, letting the crate crash down below them and kill them all. You may want to explode a wall nearby and enter from above to give yourself an advantage. Maybe you just want the explosions as a distraction to drag guards away from your position. The world in general in Outlaw's Vengeance is designed to be your enemy and your ally, depending on how you use the resources available to you. The same pipes that you can scale, you can burst steam from and explode. You can rob guards and let them live, or kill them and steal the key from their dead body. Everything that you exploit has to stem from the world, from the setting. So there comes a point in the awkward struggle that is making a video game in which you have to make a decision whether you want to add many more mechanics or you want to thoughtfully add less mechanics that interact better. And this is a point that relates to game design and the overall cohesion of a project that I think is a very important part of kind of where we are and where we've been, that relates to the 3 stages we were talking about: resistance, solution, and exploitation. As we move away from the basic parkour and stealth and combat mechanics that we've added into the more original ones or complicated ones, the key and the challenge, in my opinion, is to find the few mechanics that will work best when in conjunction with other mechanics, because what a lot of games will do is just add a slew of game mechanics that don't really interact well with each other and that only work in isolation, and it'll lead to a game that feels a bit too linear, not that cohesive, and it's very difficult to scale by combining them in different ways to make interesting scenarios.
Because we have such a limited budget, we have to be very careful about what mechanics you choose to pay attention to and which ones you're like, either I will do it later,
Always do it later.
or we're gonna have to scrap that.
When we started off with our core mechanics, we had a very straight path forward because we knew exactly what we wanted to do, what games we were inspired of, and therefore what we needed to achieve. Then you get to this awkward phase, as I spoke about, of the game project, where you have to solve for the problems that your project has created. So for example, if we have the city that we're parkouring through, that's fun to do, but it's only fun to do for a certain amount of time. And if we want to scale that or add more original things for our game to be our own, we have to think of how to do it. I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, but there's this guy called Tim Kaine who is responsible for making the Fallout series kind of what it is. He's a very famous game developer, and he's also the game director, I think, in the Outer Worlds games, Outer Worlds 1 and 2. And he has an amazing YouTube channel where he just sits in front of the camera and gives you lectures on his experience and his philosophy about game dev. And it's a really, really interesting channel that I recommend you watch. And there's one concept that I think pertains very interestingly to this conversation, and I'll explain why in a second. He spoke about something called setting, story, and systems, which speaks on the common belief that when it comes to a game, what you should focus on first is gameplay. You need to make sure the gameplay works, you validate the gameplay, you prototype the gameplay, and then you build the story, and you worry about the narrative, and you worry about the world building. And that's kind of common knowledge in the video game world, is you want to focus on gameplay first. The way I understand it from him and other people that I've read, and my personal opinion as well, is that that's only true under certain circumstances where your gameplay is extremely novel, where you have to really make sure that what you're prototyping, because it hasn't really been done before, works. But because in our situation, and in many other game situations, we're building off of a very validated base. We know a game revolving around parkour, stealth, and hunting targets works because other games have done it, like Dishonored or AC. We know that the idea of hunting a target as a core gameplay loop works because Hitman does it, and so many other games do it as well now, like Ghost of Yotei. So because the core gameplay premise works, and we're fairly confident that with playtests and iterations and whatever, we can get a fun base, it's sometimes better to start with the setting, especially for the second layer of mechanics that we're adding. If you think of it in terms of layers of mechanics, you have the base layer of what the core game is, which is a stealth action game revolving around the assassin fantasy. And then you notice that your world feels dead when you're running around it, and maybe you have to build more movement and dynamism into it, maybe you have to integrate physics like we did. That's where the second layer comes in. And if you begin with only gameplay, you might be sacrificing the identity of the IP for no real reason, and you might be sacrificing opportunities to come up with unique ideas that set your game apart. Because if I set my game world in a fantasy world or in a sci-fi futuristic world, the solutions that I will arrive at to fix this dead world problem will be different than the one that we have in our world. So if I'm doing a fantasy RPG, maybe my traversal options revolve around magic or flight or potions or spells. Starting with the setting to figure out the secondary layer of mechanics is interesting because the ideas for gameplay mechanics stem from the world that you exist in. Not only does that give you fresh ideas that only your game or games in your universe will have, but also it lets you have new ideas that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So for example, when we were doing our climbing system, we weren't really thinking too much about setting until we were faced with the second layer problem of how to make our game world feel a bit more alive, a bit more developed. We look at our world and we look at our world building and we know that we're kind of like in this industrial age mix of cowboy and Roman empires, and we think, what are we going to have a lot of? Pipes. Bunch of fucking pipes. So then you go, okay, then what can we do with pipes? Do we want to add not just regular climbing, but also climbing through pipes? We added that. Do we want pipes to be interactable or just dress setting? Well, it's more fun when it's interactable because, again, if you go to the physics equation, if you go to systems that interact well with each other, if I give Silas a gun, can he shoot a pipe, and what will the pipe do? If it does a burst of steam, can that cause a reaction on a guard and therefore kill a guard in a creative way? If it does an explosion, will the thing that it explodes next to break down? So then we add the exploding wall. So now you have a gun, an exploding pipe, and an exploding wall that in isolation are fine mechanics, but when you put them together, lead to a very creative way of manipulating your environment. And all of those things are elements that kind of work stemming from the setting. And obviously these are generic, a pipe exploding or a wall exploding, but it serves the argument that if you begin with setting, as Tim Kaine says, and then you look at the story, Silas is an assassin who uses the environment to his advantage. Therefore, the gameplay systems we develop in the second layer have to kind of reflect that. So all of this helps us guide the decisions we made to make this world feel more dynamic.
One of the things that we're currently working through is figuring out what this world looks like specifically, because we have ideas, we have a mix of concepts, but you have to figure out how those things actually materialize. So I'm interested in seeing if figuring out even more about the world will lead to more innovative ideas for the gameplay.
And this is what's, I think, in my view, the beauty and the horror of gaming as a medium, which is that the amount of constraints that you're held by is unmatched by any other medium, really. But also the amount of opportunities is also unmatched. Nothing is more difficult in terms of creation than video games because you have to join so many disciplines to create one cohesive product. Artists and computer scientists, musicians and sound designers and actors and writers, just to create one product. And that doesn't happen if you're trying to write a novel, for example, where you can create enormous worlds without considering costs. Even movies with CGI really don't have as many constraints as we do because you can create a scene that you don't have to move in space in. So you can create a beautiful VFX scene, like the black hole scene in Interstellar, which took a lot of manpower, but you don't have to move around in that scene, so you can determine exactly what shots you want and only dump resources into that. But at the same time, video games allow you to do basically anything you want as long as you can program it and animate it. So it's this thing where at the same time as giving us a bunch of problems, for example, our world is quite square and rectangular in terms of shape language, comes a lot of opportunity in terms of how to break that in terms of art design or gameplay design and what we can do with that.
It really makes me think of solo devs and how they're doing everything themselves.
It's absolutely insane. I must say it's becoming less and less common as games, like the standard for games become bigger.
Especially as standards go up.
Which is a whole different conversation about standards that I think is interesting to have. I don't know if this is a channel for it, but it's very interesting how the standards of indie games is going up because there's so many amazing indie games coming up, but the expectation is sometimes misplaced, or the load on, for example, someone who wants to be a solo developer is no longer realistic, because if you're an amazing programmer, maybe you're also amazing at doing art, but are you good at composing music? Are you good at designing sound? Are you good at playtesting your own things? Do you have a critical eye for that? Are you good at designing levels? Most programmers hate designing levels. We're in the process of solving two things. One is, how can a world feel less lifeless as you run through it? And obviously this is going to expedite immensely when we add the art and the sound and the NPCs, everything that comes only after you've validated the block out and confirmed that the way things are laid out is fun, because for a game like this, that's the most important part. The second thing is, how can we do it in a way that adds mechanics that makes our game a bit more unique, and two, that adds to the world building in a way that's non-static, like dress setsy. For example, the pipe example. Very simple one, but I think it drives the point across, which is we could just add pipes into the art, but why can't we climb the pipes if there's going to be so many? Let's add a mechanic where we can climb the pipes. That seems like a good place to invest resources in.
So what is an example of a mechanic that you thought of adding, but then you had to like scrap for the time being or permanently because you needed to prioritize something else?
Well, I'll give you one that hopefully by the time this video comes out is fixed, and therefore I can talk about it. I'm going to go into salesman mode. What salesmen do is when you ask them what's not in the game, they'll be like, I'll tell you what is in the game. So I'll tell you which one we paused on but now is fixed and better, and if it's not, edit this shit out. Basically, I was playing Dishonored, as one does, and one way that they give the player character the ability to rise and go down in terms of verticality is chains. Dunwall is a very industrial city inspired by England, so there's going to be chains all over the place because it's a very mechanical place. And I was like, I want that. That's the peak of my originality, is going, me too. So we basically said it'd be really, really cool to add chains. And the problem is, it's much easier to add chains in Dishonored because there's no physics reaction. It's like this static object. It has this little rattling sound when you attach to it, but for the most part, you just go up and down floating because it's a first-person game. Guess what we need in a third-person game? Animations. So we try, and the animations don't work, and the physics reaction, because if Silas attaches to a chain, we wanted the chain to swing a bit. The chain wasn't fucking swinging.
Can I put a video of what they looked like?
We'll show you a video of what they were when they were broken and it just wasn't working and the chains were like freaking the fuck out and having a physics reaction, and our poor programmer has had to go back and do it again, and hopefully by the time you see this, it's fixed and it's looking sick and there's like nice swinging and everything's looking great.
Vision,
iteration, perseverance, bunch of fucking perseverance, borderline delusion. But I would say that's a good example because we do have the chain, and thus you should wishlist the game. Even the things we don't have, we do have. If we finish the game and sell one copy.
If there's one positive review.
Guys, in the comment section, practice writing a review for the game that you're about to play.
I love that writing prompt.
And that way they can set expectations that then we'll have panic attacks trying to meet. Because I'm already handling this game very well in terms of mental health. There's other stuff I want to add that you just created a lake. What is this?
Do not say that in front of the camera. They're gonna roast me.
Dude, this is the fucking Red Sea, bro. Moses is about to fucking spit this. The idea now, basically, at this stage in the game, is we really want to get people fucking around and finding out. We want to stop adding more mechanics for the moment, refine everything, test everything, and then once that's validated, start building on top of that. But we have a very strong base, and I think we have enough mechanics, gameplay proposition, and value proposition where we have to make it work.
The team has been begging to stop with the mechanics.
Every meeting, the team's like, yeah, so I was thinking we could refine this, and I was like, we need to fucking add pipes. We can't have a game with no pipes. Now they've won, so we're going to focus on polishing and ironing everything out and testing and making sure everyone's having fun with what we do have before adding more stuff. Next video you'll see, I'm not even going to make promises, but ideally we want to start covering the problems that come with art, sound design, music. We have a composer that we cannot wait to share with you guys.
Oh my god.
So interesting, exciting progress, but this kind of like the middle child moment of the game. 26 minutes to talk about how we added an elevator, an exploding wall, and a pipe. So there's a video that we talk about level design, which stems from the settings and story argument of building from the world, also bleeds into level design because level designers are also world builders, and I love level designers to death. So if you want to watch that video, click on that now.